You heard what Senator Corker said. What do you make of that?
Well, it may not be an agreement that he can endorse and support, but I think they are getting close to an agreement that a significant majority can support. It's not going to be everything a lot of us had hoped for. Certainly those that were involved in Bowles-Simpson, the group of six, would probably have had a bigger package, but this is significant, moving in the right direction, and I think quite close to an agreement.
And I guess we don't even need to speculate. Maybe it'd be, I don't know, something like go to 500. Do we end up at 500? A little bit less than 1.2 trillion, and kind of these kiss your sister spending cuts, kind of, Senator? Well, look, the spending restraint that's here is real. If it's $400 billion on health care, that's real. If it's $200 billion on other mandatory spending, frankly, that's real. It's not as much as some of us would have done if we would have gotten a bigger revenue package. But look, it is what it is. At the end of the day, you can only do what you can do in the Congress, and this is significant. I don't think it should be underplayed. There will be significant deficit reduction as part of this plan. It does mean we avoid going over the cliff. It does mean we're moving in the right direction in terms of spending restraint and discipline. So those are good things, and they're not easily achieved, as readily apparent.
But are we going to be creating a second cliff as a result of this?
I don't know. You know, we got to see the details before we conclude that. Look, it does appear that they're going to clear the decks of a lot of things that have wasted an enormous amount of time here. The alternative minimum tax, you know, how many times, Joe, have we been concerned about whether the alternative minimum tax was going to come back and bite tens of millions of Americans? We're going to clear the deck of that. How many times have we been worried about the doc fix that is going to require a 30% cut to the doctors who treat Medicare-eligible patients? They're going to clear the deck of that. That's going to free up this place to do other serious work that needs to be done, like fundamental tax reform, which I think most of us know is badly needed.
Yeah, we probably want both sides really carping. So that so we got one side. Maybe we need the other.
Senator, I'm intrigued by your mention of Bowles-Simpson and how this didn't go far enough. So Bowles-Simpson had less of a tax increase than this bill and far more spending cuts than this bill. So what happens next? When do we finally get those additional spending cuts to get back to the kind of bipartisan deal that Bowles-Simpson laid out?
Let me just correct you on one point. Bowles-Simpson had significantly more revenue than this package. Significantly more revenue. It was 3-1.
Did it?
No. I know that's what was advertised. That's not what it really was.
So the way Bowles-Simpson was advertised wasn't accurate?
That's the way Erskine Bowles told us it was, Senator. We asked him last week.
You get into this whole question of what baseline you're using. If we're going to be straight with people, Bowles-Simpson was about 60% spending cuts, 40% revenue.
That's not how Erskine Bowles himself, though.
That's fine, because he's using, but that's because he's using the baselines that were used in Bowles-Simpson, and I'm not going to take your time to bore you with the details. One thing I understand very well is how to make these comparisons accurately. He's making it on the basis of the baseline that was used at the time that showed 3-1. On a fair comparison basis to what's being done now, it was 60% spending, 40% revenue. So in Bowles-Simpson, on a fair comparison basis, instead of $1.2 trillion of revenue, $2.4 trillion of revenue. That's a huge difference.
Senator,
and of course, more spending cuts as well.
Stay with us for 1 second. Let's go now to Steve Leisman, who has a quote from the GOP, from a GOP person.
Source familiar with the negotiations,
Great.
Joe. That's the sourcing we have on that. They did respond to our request for a response to the White House proposal, and I want to give you the full quote here. Quote, our numbers are $1 trillion in spending cuts versus $1 trillion in revenue balance. Their numbers are $1.3 trillion in revenue and $930 billion in in spending cuts, not remotely close to balanced, still quite a bridge to close there. Now, I asked what's the difference, because, of course, the White House is saying that they're at $1.2 trillion in spending, and the response was they are counting interest savings as spending cuts, which is a joke. Another piece of the difference is as you go to that changed CPI, you also affect tax brackets, so there's an additional $95 billion in taxes as well that from what the administration is counting. So, guys, where we are is not just competing proposals, but competing views
and
of each other's
and
competing math on each other's proposals.
So, and Steve, the other thing was I heard other people complain that the president is also proposing some increased spending, 80 billion here and 50 billion there, or something like that. And those numbers hadn't been put into the proposal. So the movement on the president's part, as I understand it, is he has dropped a continuation of the payroll tax cuts, but apparently still there's unemployment insurance in there, and I think that $50 billion in additional infrastructure spending remains part of the president's proposal. All right, Senator Conrad, why don't we come back with what Steve is just telling us? Again, you hear this, and your interpretation of what we've laid out is very different than what we heard from Senator Corker just 20 minutes ago. He looked at this and said no deal. He did agree that there was movement there, but he didn't think a deal would get done this week. Do you?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I would just say that obviously they're very close. Look, the difference, for example, on interest. Every bipartisan group has counted the savings on interest as a cut in spending, because it is a cut in spending. So every bipartisan group has counted the interest savings as a cut in spending. That's $290 billion. That's a big part of the difference in this package. Clearly, that difference can be bridged. Every single bipartisan group has counted interest savings as a cut in spending,
all right,
including Bowles-Simpson.
It's not balanced.
But I will give you the idea that Larry is saying it's not balanced, but I will give you absolutely that the bipartisan groups use these measures, and Senator Conrad, obviously you would know as somebody who's been involved with so many of these bipartisan talks too.
You know, look, is there still a ways to go, and it's not insignificant? Absolutely. Is this a bridge that can be crossed? Absolutely. Is it in the nation's interest to do so? I believe it is, even though this won't be everything that many of us had hoped for. So it is a significant step and a welcome one.
So you're familiar with all the inner workings. So there are a lot of your peers, some senators on the other side that want the House to pass that, the Bush tax cut for the 98% or some version of that, and then go over the cliff and then talk later. Do you think that's going to happen in the House?
I don't know. I would say this to you. I have had two prominent Republican senators come to me and say, look, we've got to go over the cliff for just a day at least so that we get out from under Grover Norquist's pledge. Because, as you know, if you're past January 1st, then all of these things that are talked about as tax increases are scored officially as tax cuts. And so some Republicans, at least, believe very strongly that that gets them out from under Grover Norquist's pledge.
Wow. I see why you're leaving. It's a lot of inscrutable things happening there, Senator.
Yeah, it's a lot of inscrutable things. Look, I just say this to you. The complexity of these things is far more than can ever be explained in a 30-second soundbite. Yeah. When you get into the budget world, it's its own world. And it takes real homework to understand what's really happening. So, but again, I think it's important to say this step is an important one for the country. It moves us in the right direction. It avoids what could have been a calamity for this country, at least in terms of the economics. And it's moving us in the right direction. So, hey, we can applaud that. Is there more to be done? Absolutely. Okay. There'll be more chances.
All right. The right's screaming too much. I definitely want the left screaming a little bit more. I do. I want the left screaming a little bit more. They're not screaming enough, Senator.
Could you complain a little bit more?
Just wait, Joe.
They're a great screamer. They will? Okay.
Oh, my goodness. They are going to be very, very upset with parts of this.
All right. I look forward to that.
Change CPI? Just wait.
Really? Okay. All right. Now you piqued my interest. Now you got me. You had me at hello. All right. Thank you, Senator. Hello.